Matrix keyboards have been around for longer than I have been in the hobby, well before 2020, and they've been known for their finishes, aesthetics, and just crazy designs. There were a few runs like the 2.0 and the 2.0 ad that sounded really good in terms of the top mount TKL space, but the rest of their boards usually sound a little bit more subpar. So today I won't be able to talk about every single Matrix board, just a few that I've noticed and I've kept tabs on or I've tried personally or my community has tried personally. There are just so many Matrix boards that it's really hard to keep track of. Today we're looking at a few modern options. We have here the Mr. Taxi, which is crazy in its own right. We have the 8X V1/3, and I don't know why, but my community loves stupid yellow as much as I do. And we also have the Hiya, which is weird. Thanks Ken for sending this one over. You're a freak for liking HHKB, but the aesthetics of this is really hard to deny. In terms of these recent offerings, they're not just using top mount, they're using a modernized top mount with either a little rubber piece acting as kind of like a burger mount or a PC piece that's going to interface between the plate and the case in the top mount. This is supposed to reduce some of the vibration, not necessarily a force break modification. I do think it sounds better than what they've had before, but the main key is with these Matrix boards, old or new, you definitely want a non-flex cut 1.6mm PCB. If you don't have that, you're really rolling the dice there, because if you have 1.2mm and or flex cuts or a flex cut plate, it's gonna sound very flat, sound very dead, sound very dull, and not gonna sound very great. But still, it's really hard to argue with an aesthetic like this, even if it doesn't sound top tier. In terms of my personal experience with the keyboards I've owned, I first owned the Matrix 1.2 OG in Peacock. It was like a light teal cyan color, and that was early on in January 2021. The inkside loops back then were horrible. They were my first loop switches, overlooped to hell. That board immediately sounded hollow in the top mount configuration. It actually came with a rubber piece for case dampening. Even with that, it sounded kind of dull. The rubber case dampening piece, it doesn't really allow for a crisp, clean top mount sound, but the spacebar just sounded honestly pretty gross. But in 2021 standards, a lot of the comment section really enjoyed that sound of that keyboard. Compare that sound to the keyboards today, even a budget keyboard can beat that sound. With the hollow sound and needing the case foam, I really was sensitive to case foam back then. I used it in my first ever personal custom keyboard, the KBD67 Mark II, but over time I really noticed that it did sound kind of dampened and dull. I ended up preferring the UTD 360C with MX Blackstone aluminum that I built later on. It was too sharp, so I was kind of in this weird place where case foam top mount was kind of dead and flat, and just regular top mount sounded crisp, clean, but very sharp to my ear. I wanted something in between. But back then, after I sold my Matrix 1.2 OG, I hadn't gone back. I just kind of looked from afar, as there were still fans of the Matrix boards over the years. The 2.0 ad was the modern, a little bit more modern version of the 2.0 OG, because the 2.0 OG, that had integrated USB, which is not ideal. Integrated USB means there's no plugging in there. So you see that port? That port doesn't exist. The cable comes straight out of the PCB, which makes it harder to solder, makes it harder to repair, and also just makes the board kind of bulky because you can't take it apart and pack it into a case really easily. I didn't like that on UTD 360C either. Some people with the 2.0 OG, they direct soldered a YC8 cable, which had a connector, so you could just disconnect at the YC8, and that way you can have just a little piece of cable connected to the board, and then you can kind of disconnect and switch boards. When the 2.0 ad came to the market, people got a chance to get another 2.0, but with a USB cable. Unfortunately though, some people did notice the 2.0 ad was a little bit more hollow than the original OG, but not by much in my opinion. Still using the 1.2mm non-flex cut PCB, but it's just the internal design has changed. The main thing though is now that there is a dedicated USB-C port, it is much more modern and you don't have to deal with an integrated USB. From the sound test I could see online, I could honestly go either way with these boards, mostly because I don't care as much about the last 10-20% sound of keyboards these days because I've been here for so long. As whatever is cheaper and more available with the right color and finishing, that's the one I'd go for. In my opinion, the top TKL sound is like the F1.8X V2 or V1. I personally just love that sound. So the only real problem was the 1.2mm PCB, and I know it's popular in other markets, 1.2mm PCB, whether it be for the flex or maybe they prefer the sound. Western markets don't really like it, sounds kind of flat. When Novakeys introduced the group buy for the Matrix keyboards, now we have the 3.0, and that unfortunately had, we call it bikini plate with a flex cut, skinny plate, very little plate material, and a 1.2mm PCB, and those sounded very thin and flat. That's where we kind of fell apart. That was more accessible, you didn't have to buy it for exorbitant prices. It still did not sound as good as the original 2.0 ad, so it was a hard choice to make. So some people just foamed it up and called it a day. Here on this channel, we don't like to do that. We want to at least have a keyboard that sounds good without foam, so we have the option of running foam. Sometimes some people don't like foam. But typically for me, I usually run MX box on aluminum to kind of compare boards, oranges, apples to apples. MX box on aluminum in a flex cut PCB, flex cut plate, thin PCB, doesn't sound good. So it's a very thin sound, but they still had top-notch finishing, so that didn't falter. And top-tier aesthetics. They had the heart option as well as the eye, so it looks great. Back weight looked great, rear weight looked great. So you're not losing anything in that regard. It's just you always kind of think, oh, I have to replace the PCB, I have to replace the plate to make it sound better. And that's an extra step that most people won't be willing to do. Around this time, Matrix also re-released a keyboard, or rather released a new keyboard, the Matrix Corsa, which is a callback or a reference to the Matrix Vita, which is very popular due to the screen. The Matrix Corsa allowed new people to buy into it, get a Matrix keyboard with a screen, but unfortunately they had the 1.2mm PCB as well as a flex cut skinny bikini plate, and it was supposed to be reminiscent of the Vita, which already didn't sound too great to begin with, so the Corsa was a bit of a miss in terms of the sound. So I never even got the desire to even go back and buy another Matrix keyboard because I would want the board to just have the plate and PCB that has the best full sound straight at the bat. So the modernized boards, we'll start holding a board in our hand now, the Hiya right here. Heavy, a lot of weight, a lot of design. It stands out for sure, like it's quite a looker. And my community sent me these to build and test. I don't own these. For the Hiya, I do like that this is one of the Matrix options that has a 1.6mm non-flex cut PCB, yielding a fuller sound, even if it's a smaller keyboard like this. Smaller keyboards typically don't sound as full as their larger counterparts, like the 75 or the TKL, especially the TKL. Talked about it, the top mount is modernized with a little PC plate. Still basically a top mount. The build is very straightforward. I did enjoy it. Like I didn't have to assemble all the way because that was one of my concerns. Like, dude, do I have to put all those pieces together, line them up, and make sure I don't scuff any piece in the process? No, the case is already assembled. So there's a 60% HSKB. So the left control is gone. That's why there's a big chunk missing here most of the time. Or left control is here. Left control, right control. Caps lock is replaced by left control. And then your function key will be this key. And then most of the time when people do arrows, they do arrows, I can't see right there. And I can't really do that. I'd like to have IJKL arrows, so I do caps lock as my function key and IJKL arrows. That way I can use my right hand for IJKL arrows. That's how my brain works, but HHKB arrows is something people do. And if you like the layout, because I honestly do think this looks aesthetic and very pleasing, especially with this crazy blocker badge here that lights up. Show some footage of that. Light up blockers just blow my mind because I'm a very simple child. Overall, the aesthetic is top notch. We have GMK Rainy Day here. In terms of the sound, this is SP Star Meteor White's V1, and we built it with the rubber piece burger mount at first. It sounded kind of flat and dull and not great. Hollow, pretty hollow. And then we did the PC, and then we did force break, which improved it. And then we did PC with the force break, and that sounded the best. Then that's where it sounded pretty good. Not top notch, like not F1 in my opinion, but usable, like 8, 8.5. You're not gonna be like, ah, this keyboard sounds bad. You're just gonna be like, okay, this is more aesthetics first, and you know what you're getting into with Matrix. You're not expecting the best sound, but a quite usable sound, so that you're not gonna feel like you wasted money. We'll talk about the money and the cost of these keyboards in a second. This one costs $600. But yeah, very basic assembly, top mount, case, very easy. And there's 2 JSTs, so no ribbon cables. Surprised they can run JST RGB, because for some reason a lot of the boards from China, they have to use ribbon cables, which I hate because they're hard to install and they're easy to break. Then moved on to the Mr. Taxi in sunflower yellow, to be modeled after the taxis in New York City. I don't really have to explain the aesthetic. This thing is just wondrous. Theming is perfect, and it's crazy, dude. Look at the attention to detail. Powered by Matrix Labs since 2015, New York City, the taxi. We got some PVD finishes, mixed materials, and we got the sparkly around New York City. So we got the Matrix coating on there. And this badge right here is magnetic. You can swap it out. Magnetic. They really like their magnetic badges. Oh yeah, there's a freaking screen here by the escape key, and a badge over here that lights up as well with 3 LED bars. That's crazy. Now, you may think to yourself, why is that so big? Why does it look like a TKO? Well, it's a 75% keyboard with 2 navigation columns, which is odd. I guess it's to be able to fit more 1U badges and blockers in there. I mean, they're using the space well because there's LEDs everywhere, but it's a very cursed layout. But for this board, honestly, you don't really want to use it. You just want to put it on a rotating display and just have it spin constantly. Like, it looks great. Like, I like that thing. In terms of the sound, it sounded better than the Hiya. The Hiya needed force break and the PC to be able to sound as good as just this, even without force break. Put it in force break and it sounds pretty solid. Bigger case, more weight, more heft, more material, typically sounds a little bit more full. So I like this sound more than the Hiya. And the bezel of this board is very large, stands out, so it doesn't look like other minimal sharp edges boards. We have the Serious Artisan here to match. I love NY. We built this with HMX 80 retros, which are high pitch HMX long pole switch. So that's probably why it sounds a little bit better than the Hiya, because HMX switches, if you like the high pitch long pole sound, are gonna make any board, even lesser sounding boards, sound really good. It's gonna reduce the hollowness, so it's a thing you can do. Like, it's not a problem. Like, if you like HMX, I'm all for it. I do like to try MX box on aluminum if I can, to compare boards. Then I'll use inks personally. HMX, Garon, ink. Nope, this sounds better than the Hiya, dude. We have GMK Mika here just for the theme. We have yellow, white, black, just to make sure the aesthetic is congruent, even if you don't see it. The person I'm building this for, Krieger, he just doesn't really care about sound that much. He just likes things to look cool. Next we have the 8X V1/3. More normal layout. This is a TKL. And we have GMK Greg on here. And the back weight of this is stellar. Like, oh my god. I love it, dude. I love it. I freaking love it. Like, we have a 1.2 millimeter non-flex cut PCB on this one. MX blocks on aluminum. They're diamond polished. GMK Greg, my personal unit. It looks stupid, and I will agree. But we have a light up little eye thing here. I do like this more than the 3.0 badges, because you have a badge that's magnetic here, swappable, and then you have the LEDs here. And I don't think there's any LED anywhere else, so a little bit more simple. We have the PVD in the back, still with the yellow, and it looks great. In terms of the sound, I think it sounds barely better than the Hiya, and that's probably because it's a 1.2 millimeter PCB, so it's not going to sound as great. I expected a little bit worse, but it's definitely in the usable category. I would say like a 7 out of 10, 7.5 out of 10. I didn't force break this one just yet, but I don't think it's gonna make a huge difference just because it's a thinner PCB. Aesthetically speaking, I like this one the most because TKL, if I'm gonna have one layout, it's gonna be TKL, because in terms of work, now that I do more big boy stuff at work, F keys are pretty vital. I don't want to layer it because I have to do like Control Shift F key, and if I have to do that Control Shift layer F or a numero, it's gonna be too much of this, so I'm not gonna bother with all that. Probably gonna lean towards using a TKL for work and personal use at home, a 65. In general, I think Matrix has improved their sounds with their refined top mount, even with 1.2mm PCBs. 1.6mm PCBs are preferred, so if there's a second-hand option or third-party option or maybe a first-party option, I would go for 1.6 every single time. I still think the 2.0 adds sound, even with the 1.2mm PCB, edges out the sound of current offerings today. For some Matrix boards, there is an option to buy a third-party 1.6mm PCB to swap in. If there's that option, I'd definitely go for it. Some people prefer the 1.2mm PCB sound. I prefer 1.6 thicker every single time. The original Matrix 2.0 OG, to my surprise, was also using 1.2mm PCBs. So the Matrix 2.0 OG was something special. Still doesn't really compete, in my opinion, with the modern F1, but really good for the sound of keyboards at that time. But overall, trying these new modern keyboards from Matrix, I think Matrix sound is getting up there, at least the modern ones, because the modern boards are like, it's not gonna sound as good as a 2.0 ad or a 2.0 OG, but these are pretty good. I don't hate them. I would use them, especially with this aesthetic, and they mainly it's because they use RGB a lot and they use it well. Like, RGB is great. The top mount implementation is solid. I definitely would force break them. I could justify not using foam, but they come with all the foam, so you could run the foams and get a decent solid sound that way, as long as you don't listen to the haters about the foam and stuff. Like, it's your board, do what you want with it. I just like to review things without the foam so I can see how it sounds, so I can compare them equally, because not every board that I get in the office has foam. Out of these three, my favorite is honestly probably this one to look at, because this back weight, the theme is just so on point. And this one's second, it's a little bit more simple. And this one third, because HHKB is weird. But if you like HHKB enough, this thing is freaking cool. In terms of the price points, I don't know. They're expensive. They're all 500 plus. So the Hiya 620, the Mr. Taxi is 530 in GB. I think it's a little bit more on extras. And the 8XV 1/3 is 670 on extras. They're expensive boards. If you just want a good sounding board, you can get probably a better sound, cheaper, going alternative routes. But you're not going to get the crazy aesthetic and the finishing of Matrix boards. So yeah, I think these boards are cool. I appreciate my community for sending them for me to try. I'm really excited to see what Matrix does next, because they have the wildest designs in the keyboard space. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.